Hello students, in this video lecture we are going to discuss about the various CPU scheduling algorithms. The first CPU scheduling algorithm we are going to discuss about is FCFS or first come first served. FCFS is the simplest of all the CPU scheduling algorithms. The overhead of for implementing the FCFS is very minimal. We just have to create a queue into which every new process will be joined, and the selection from the queue is based on the idea of first come first served. So the first process which joins the queue is also the first process to enter the CPU, and this idea is called FIFO or first come first in first out. And any new process will only enter at the rear of the queue. That is strictly as per the FIFO queue principle, that it has to be, any new entrant has to be joined only at the rear of the queue. And when the CPU becomes free after completing the current process, the next process is always the one which waits at the beginning of the queue or head of the queue. So because of this simple arrangement, it's generally easier to implement FCFS than many other scheduling algorithms. And one more characteristic of FCFS is that it is non-preemptive, which means that a process that goes into the CPU gets completed unless it is requiring to go through some IO operation, or it has made some system call. For no other reason, the OS will interrupt the execution of a process that has entered into the CPU. So FCFS strictly follows the non-preemptive principle. So processes will get completed in a single turn. This point of a non-preemptive nature of FCFS is very important while we implement the example for the FCFS based on the FCFS algorithm. Once the CPU has been allocated to a process, that process keeps the CPU until it releases the CPU, either by terminating, which means it completes its execution, or it has to go through IO operation. But remember that for our examples, we are going to ignore the IO part, because we are only going to treat the CPU burst time, not the IO burst time, while we discuss the algorithm. So we take this an example to evaluate the FCFS. But before going to that, let us try to identify the drawbacks and the advantages of FCFS. We have already seen the advantage of FCFS, that it is simplest to implement, and also since it is non-preemptive, the number of context switches will be minimal. So the meaning of context switch is that whenever we replace the current process by a new process, it's considered as a context switch. So FCFS will require lowest number of context switch, because it lets every process to stay in the CPU for their till they complete, and then only it goes to the next process. So context switch will also be reduced when you follow FCFS. These are the merits of FCFS. Now the drawbacks. It will have poor waiting time. That is because, let's consider that a short process is waiting behind some 2 or 3 long processes. So what will happen is that the short process is going to have a longer waiting time until the long processes that are standing in front of it will get completed. So the waiting time of the short processes will be very poor under FCFS. On the other hand, if a long process waits behind a couple of short processes, then it's going to be waiting for only a short period of time. So long process won't be suffering when it is waiting behind a short process, but the reverse is going to be happening. Consider the following process that arrive at time 0. We assume that all the processes arrive at the same time. So initially we will be simplifying the discussions by assuming that all the process arrive at the same time. But you may also consider the possibility that different process arriving at different times. So in that case you should only consider the process that have arrived at a given point of time. So as of now we don't need to differentiate that. We assume that all the process arrive at the same time, which is time 0. So they are all equal now. Now P1 has got the burst time of 24, P2 burst time of 3, and P3 also having the burst time of 3. So the burst time, meaning of burst time is that it is the time that it requires to complete. So if P1 is given 24 units of CPU time, it will get completed, whereas P2 only needs 3 units of CPU time. That is what the meaning of burst time. So what happens now in this given example is that initially all the three processes just wait in the ready queue, and we also assume that there is a clock maintained by the CPU. So the clock is initialized with the 0. Now at time 0 P1 is scheduled onto the CPU and it begins to execute, and since it is non-preemptive, it will not be disturbed till it completes, which means that it will occupy the CPU for 24 units of time or 24 milliseconds. So at the end of the 24th millisecond, P1 is completed and immediately P2 goes into the CPU at 24 clock, when the clock is 24. Now P2 requires 3 units of time, so it will spend 24 plus 3, 27 units of time, and then it also gets completed. So eventually we only have one process waiting in the queue, that is P3, that also enters the CPU, and so all the processes have been completed in 30 units of time. That is what the result we have got for the given example. And there is one more way of representing this execution, which is called as a Gantt chart. So this is something you may have to present while while writing the answer for this question. The Gantt chart illustrates a particular schedule including the start and finish times of each of the participating processes. It's simply given like this. So 0 to 24 P1 is executed, then from 24 to 27 P2 is executed, and finally 27 to 30 P3 is executed. This way of representing the schedule of processes is called as a Gantt chart. We can also calculate the waiting time with the help of this chart. So waiting time is nothing but that period of time a process spent in the memory without getting executed. So which means that here what happens is P1 don't have any waiting time because the time it arrives is 0 and it immediately commences the execution, and so its waiting time is simply 0. Whereas the waiting time of P2 is 24 units of time because it arrived at 0 but its execution commenced only at 24. So till then it was simply waiting. So its waiting time is 24. Similarly, the waiting time of P3 is calculated as 27. Now the average waiting time is 17 milliseconds. So 17 is a very high value. That is because we have a long process followed by short processes. So the waiting time of the short processes have been increased because of the situation of waiting behind a long process. On the other hand, if the processes arrived in the order of P2, P3 and P1, that means the long process comes at the end, which means what would have happened is that the Gantt chart will now become like this. The waiting time of the processes P2 and P3 would have been drastically improved. So now the average waiting time is only 3. So it only proves the point that FCFS will have a long waiting time whenever short processes are waiting behind long processes. This is a drawback of FCFS. And one more drawback of FCFS is that it makes the IO bound process to suffer. And the reason is that the meaning of IO bound process is that a process that has got more frequent IO operations. And the meaning of CPU bound process is processes that have least number of IO bound instructions or IO instructions. So whenever an IO bound process enters the CPU, because when there is an IO operation, it gets immediately thrown out of the CPU. So it's likely to be thrown out more frequently whenever it gets into the CPU. So it will take a lot of time to get completed. Once it is thrown out of the CPU, it once again go to the ready queue, join at the end, and then make a progress to the beginning again. So IO bound process will get a more frequent interruption and switching. They will be switched more often, resulting in their waiting time to be very high. Another is convoy effect, which we just discussed right now. So whenever short processes wait, and also the long processes would monopolize the CPU under FCFS because it's non-preemptive. Any non-preemptive scheduling have the chance of one process monopolizing or occupying the CPU for a very long period of time, making all other processes to starve. The next CPU scheduling algorithm we have in the list is priority scheduling. Priority scheduling is very similar to FCFS, except that now we replace the arrival time by priority value. So instead of simply going by the arrival time of the processes, we give a different value to each process called a priority value. So now based on the priority of the process, we schedule them. So it is a slight modification of FCFS to make it into priority, and priority is also generally non-preemptive like FCFS. So highest priority process gets scheduled as the next process. Whenever we have a situation that two processes having equal priority waiting in the queue, we can just follow the FCFS principle that whichever came first may be given the chance. And there is also an issue about whether we should treat lowest value as highest priority or highest value as lowest priority. That is whether 0 should be given highest priority or lowest priority. It is simply left to the implementation. It can be treated in any way. So during implementation, we just have to follow our own choice, either making 0 as the lowest or highest. And normally the lowest value is considered to have the highest priority. And we have got both types of implementations, and this is currently non-preemptive scheduling. Now we are taking this example. We are given 5 processes with their burst times and priority. Since we are now discussing priority scheduling, we need an additional value called priority value, and now also we assume that all the processes exactly arrive at the same time. So the queue is like this: P1, P2, P3, P4 and P5. Now when the execution when the scheduling starts at clock 0, instead of going by the order, it goes by the priority. So among the given processes, the process that has the maximum priority is P2. So we are following that approach where lowest value means highest priority. So P2 has the lowest value, so it is scheduled next onto the CPU, and how long it will be taking to complete? Its burst time is 1, so it gets completed at clock 1. The next process with the highest priority is P5. So P5 goes into the CPU and it is executed for how many units of time? 5 units of time. So burst time is 5, so it will be completed at 6. The next one is P1, it's completed at 16. Similarly P through follows, and finally P4 also gets the CPU and it is completed at 19. So this is the way in which the processes are executed under priority scheduling, and the same has been calculated here. So arrival times are listed, burst times are listed, and the priorities are also provided. Now we have to calculate the finish time. So the finish time of each process has to be calculated and represented like this. So process P1 completes at 16. That's what we also have seen here. So that has to be mentioned as a result here. And we are, as usual, we should provide the Gantt chart. So the Gantt chart represents the starting and ending time of each process. And you calculate the average waiting time, it results in 8.2 milliseconds. And when it comes to priority assignment, so how do we assign the priorities? There are two options for that. One is assigning it simply internally, that is the OS assigns a priority within itself, within the computer. Another is external priority. So processes may also be relating to some external influences. So the priority may also be based on their external association or connection. Internally defined priorities use some measurable quantity or quantities to compute the priority of a process. For example, time limits. So we have something called as a real-time system. In a real-time system, every process comes with a deadline. We must complete the processes before their deadlines. So the process that has the lowest deadline may be given the highest priority. So time limits is one factor. Memory requirements may be another factor. Number of open files for a process. A process that has opened the more number of files may be completed quickly, so that those files are released and made available to other process. And lastly, the ratio of average burst time to average CPU burst time, that is another factor. So these are various ways by which we can compute the priorities. We may also find our own ways of calculating or assigning the priorities to the processes. Now the external priorities are set by criteria outside the operating system, like the importance of process in the environment. For example, in a nuclear power plant, the module that controls the air conditioning of the power plant is more important than the one that controls the air conditioning of the staff or the office. So in that way, based on the priority in the environment, the priority can also be assigned to the processes. And similarly, type and amount of funds associated with the process, and the department which sponsors the work, and similarly the political and other factors may also be considered. And one more deviation or a difference in priority scheduling is that it can also be implemented as non-preemptive scheduling, preemptive scheduling. So far we were discussing about priority scheduling as a non-preemptive scheduling, which means like FCFS, when the highest priority process goes to the CPU, it gets completed and then leaves the CPU. For no other reason, the process gets removed from the CPU, except when it is going through IO operation, or it's making a system call, or some trap is occurred. So for under normal circumstances, the OS will not remove or preempt that process from the CPU. But another variant of priority scheduling is preemptive variant, in which case this process which has the highest priority as of now goes into the CPU and begins to execute. and meanwhile new processes keep arriving into the system. And when suddenly a high priority process enters whose priority is higher than the one that is currently executing, the executing process will be stopped immediately and the newly joined high priority process will be sent to the CPU. Whereas if you compare the same scenario in the non-preemptive scheduling, even if a new process with more high priority arrives, it still has to wait for the currently running process to end. So that is the difference between preemptive and non-preemptive scheduling. So it dynamically, the preemptive scheduling implementation dynamically compares the priority of the currently running process with the newly arriving processes, and whenever the situation occurs that there is a high priority process that entered, it will immediately replace the currently running process. Now we are going to see the drawbacks of priority scheduling. The first and very significant drawback of FCFS is that it has a chance of creating starvation. So you just have to carefully listen to these points, because when you face your questions you may be asked, list out all the algorithms that may create starvation or list out algorithms that won't create starvation. You should be able to answer the questions accordingly. Similarly, you may be asked a question, discuss all the preemptive scheduling algorithms, or similarly discuss all the non-preemptive scheduling algorithms. So you should also be able to classify the algorithms based on the various metrics. Now coming to the drawback, FCFS won't create a starvation because it allows every process to enter the CPU as per their arrival time. But priority scheduling may result in starvation when there are new processes keep entering the system. So when there are new processes keep entering the system, they may continue to have high priority over some low priority process that is waiting in the queue for a long period of time, and that low priority process may never get a chance to enter into the CPU. So another mistake commonly made by students is that starvation means that if a process never gets a chance to enter into the CPU, and it's not the same as a process waiting for a long time before entering the CPU. So if a process waits for a long time and then gets into the CPU, that is not starvation. Only if it never gets into the CPU, never have the opportunity to run, then only it is called as a starvation. So priority scheduling is a classic example of algorithm that could create starvation. So it could cause some low priority process to remain starving forever. One remedy to overcome this drawback is aging. So aging means that as the process waits for a long period of time, its priority may be gradually increased, so that it even if it waits for a long time, at least at the end it will get a chance to enter into the CPU, since its priority may reach a high value over a period of time. This is the idea of aging. So if, for example, if the priorities ranges from 127 to 0, we could increase the priority of a waiting process by 1 every 15 minutes. The next CPU algorithm is called shortest job first scheduling. So SJF, or shortest job first scheduling. Here the algorithm associates with each process the length of the process next CPU burst time. So we already have seen the CPU burst time for every process given. We are going to use that particular value to select the next process. So here what happens is, the process with the smallest next CPU burst time goes into the CPU as a next process. When the CPU becomes free, the one which is having the lowest CPU burst time or CPU requirement will be selected next. And similarly, just like we saw in priority scheduling, when we have equal priorities, here also we may have two processes having equal CPU burst times. We can simply go by the FCFS order. And this algorithm is also non-preemptive algorithm. Now we are going to consider an example for that. So we have got these processes with their burst times. And using FJF scheduling, we would schedule these processes just based on their burst times. So looking at the example, we will first select P4 as the first process to run because it's having the lowest burst time, and then after P4 the chance will go to the P1 next, and then P2 followed by P3. So this is the order of execution as per SJF. So P4 and then P1, P3, P2, and we can calculate the average waiting times, average turnaround time, all based on this Gantt chart. Completion times of individual processes are also known with the help of this. So the waiting time is 3 milliseconds for process 1 because process 1 has to wait for 0 to 3. It was waiting for 0 to 3, and so its waiting time is 3 milliseconds, whereas 16 for process 2 because process 2 was waiting for the longest time from 0 to 16, so its waiting time is 16. Similarly, 9 milliseconds for process 3 and 0 milliseconds for process 4. So the average is calculated as 7 milliseconds. Whereas if we followed FCFS for the same example, we would have got a 10.25 milliseconds as the average waiting time, which shows that the SJF gives better performance, at least in the given example, over the FCFS algorithm. So SJF scheduling is provably optimal in that it gives the minimum average waiting time for given set of process. Moving a short process before a long one decreases the waiting time. So what we have done is that in FCFS we saw that there is a drawback to the short processes when they are waiting behind long processes. That particular problem has been rectified in this algorithm or addressed in this algorithm because we don't go by the arrival times, we go by the burst times. So the short process will jump over the long process and gets into the CPU. That's what results in improved average waiting time. But the major limitation of the SJF is that we have to have some estimate of the CPU burst time. So whenever a process enters the system for execution, we should be able to calculate the burst time or how long it requires the CPU time. We should be able to calculate that. But practically it is not always possible because when a process is submitted for execution, only when it is completed, we will know how long it took. Initially, we don't have such knowledge about the process, so that is a major drawback of FJF. FJF is it sounds very effective and reduces average wait time when it is implemented, but the implementation is not always practical. Whereas FCFS is we can easily implement FCFS, but there are some ways to make an approximate calculation of the SAF, the execution times of the processes. That is called as the approximation of the length of the CPU burst. So we can't give a precise answer of the execution time or the burst time of the processes, but we may make an approximate calculation with the help of the past value. So when you don't know the future, when you don't know exactly the future value, if you have the past history, we can calculate the future value with the help of it. Just like we do the weather forecast, we can also make a prediction of the CPU burst time of the processes, and it may not be accurate, but it is reasonably closer to the expected value. For that we have a formula. So the formula is given as capital T n plus 1 equal to alpha Tn plus 1 minus alpha into Tn. So here the Tn, which is small tn, is the length of the nth CPU burst. So the length of the nth CPU burst, that is if you are calculating the CPU burst for the current nth burst, then that's what is represented by Tn, and Tn plus 1 be our predicted value for the future next CPU burst. So yeah, Tn represents the previous one, Tn plus 1 represents the current one. And similarly, alpha will be used to control the I will see shortly the purpose of alpha. It's used to control whether you want to consider only the recent CPU burst time or the recent past, or we want to consider a long history of the execution. Accordingly, we will choose the value of alpha, which we will see in the next slide. So the value of Tn contains our most recent information about the CPU burst time of a particular process. So for a particular process for which we are calculating the CPU burst time to be taken next, Tn or small tn contains the most recent information, whereas capital Tn stores the complete history over a long period of time. So accordingly, the parameter alpha controls the relative weight of the recent and past history in our prediction. So if alpha is 0, then Tn plus 1, that is the prediction, is based on the long history. Just imagine what happens when you put 0 for alpha. So if you put 0 for alpha, this will become 0, which means that we are not going to consider the recent history, we are only going to consider the total history, because if you put 0 here, it will become 1. So the result of Tn plus 1 is simply Tn, capital Tn. So capital Tn represents long history value, and that becomes the value determining the current prediction. On the other hand, if you want to consider only the recent history, not the long history, then we take alpha as 1. So when alpha is considered as 1, it will become 1 into small tn and 1 minus 1 into capital Tn. So capital Tn will be removed from the equation, and the value will just be equivalent to the recent history. So in this way we can control the equation, whether we want to take into account only the recent history or only the long history. But the most common way of calculating this formula is involving both of them. We would like to involve both the recent history as well as the long history into the calculation. In that case, alpha will be taken as 0.5. So when alpha is taken as 0.5, it will give equal weightage to the recent history as well as past history. So in this way we can calculate the estimate of the CPU burst time for a process. In this we have been given an example like this. So we assume that the CPU burst time Ti is given as 6 initially, and the capital Ti, which is the long history, is given as 10. So by changing the value of alpha, we can influence the result. So in this example we have taken as 0.5. So 6 is the initial value of Tn, so it is considered here, and 10 is the value of capital Ti or long history, so it is also. Now the CPU burst time for that particular process is estimated as 8. So the point is that SJF has a major drawback, that we don't always know the expected CPU burst time of processes. we can only make a prediction of the values, but that are not precisely these exact values, and this is also not possible when new process arrives. When new process arrive who don't have any history of execution in the past, then we don't have any way to calculate their estimated CPU burst time. This particular approach works in certain environments where processes are typically repetitive. For example, if you consider the real-time systems generally run the same programs again and again, because like the system that control the nuclear power plants or the aircraft launching, so there the applications are same for a long period of time. So we would have got some history there. This formula is is useful, but it is not useful in general purpose computers, because here we suddenly run a new application which was never run in the past. Now the variation of a variant of SJF is preemptive variant. Just like priority scheduling can be either implemented as preemptive or non-preemptive, SJF can also be implemented as preemptive. Same way we can also understand the meaning here. So what happens when you make SJF as preemptive is that when the process is to be selected for execution, the process with the lowest service time or lowest CPU burst time is selected and it enters into the CPU. And if a new process suddenly emerges into the queue which has a much lower service time, it immediately preempts the current process and it goes into the CPU. But one significant point you have to note down here is that unlike a priority where priority value is constant, so even if a process begins to execute and spend some CPU time, its priority won't be lowered or changed. But here what happens is that when a process begins to execute, its CPU burst time gets decreased. CPU burst time is nothing but the time required for its completion. So if a process joins at time 0 and spends some 4 units of time in the CPU, now its CPU burst time is equal to original CPU burst time minus 4, or which is called as a remaining service time or remaining CPU burst time. So only that value should be compared with the service time of the new process. We should not be considering or comparing their total CPU burst time for the currently running process. We must compare only its remaining service time with the service time of the new process. This has to be carefully understood while we calculate the result. So for understanding this, we take an example. So these are the processes with their burst times given. So the initial selection will be done for the P2 process having the lowest burst time. So this is the example. Arrival times are also given. So we just note down that we have now been considering the arrival times, which means that at a time 0 when we want to schedule a process, though its burst time is higher than the next process, we should not be scheduling P2 as the first process, because at time 0 P2 has not even arrived. We must only consider processes which have arrived at the given point of time. So at time 0 our only option is P1, and so we are scheduling P1 and it runs for 1 unit of time. But at time 1 we got P2. So P2 has now joined the queue, and when you compare the remaining service time of P1, which is 7, with the service time of P2, which is 4, P2 has a much lower CPU burst time or service time. So preemption happens. P1 is preempted and P2 starts to execute, and P2 will not be interrupted by any other process because its service time is the lowest one. So after P2 completes, then the time at that particular completion is 10. So, 5. So when P2 completes at a time 5, we have to now consider the options. So at time 5, which are the process that have arrived? we have got all the process to have arrived at time 5. So we can now ignore arrival times and just go by the service times. So accordingly, the next process is selected as P4 and then it is executed, followed by P1 and P3. So there is a you would have noticed this change that happened in the scheduling because of the preemptive nature. So P1 was replaced by P2 before its completion, and if you do the same calculation under non-preemptive scheduling, P1 is the first process to get completed. P1 would have been completed ahead of other processes. So the average waiting time can also be calculated, and the way the average waiting time calculated here is that if you take the first process, which is P1 executed first 1 unit of time and then waited for up to 1 to 10. So to calculate it, it has been included as 10 minus 1 plus 1 minus 1. So 10 minus 1 means that 0 to 10 is the total time it waited. In that 1 unit it spent in the CPU. So 0 to 10 minus 1 are the time that it spent in the queue without getting executed. So the idea of a waiting time is the time a process waits in the queue without getting executed. That time for P1 is 1 to 10, or in other words 9. That is the waiting time of P1. Similarly, waiting time of P2 is its arrival time is 1 and immediately it got executed, so its waiting time is 0. It does not have any waiting time. It's 1 minus 1, 0. And similarly, P3's waiting time is 0 to 17, which is 17. And we should now consider the arrival time. The arrival time is now different. So P3's arrival time is 2. So it was waiting for 15 units of time starting from 2. So in this way we can calculate the individual waiting times and also find the average. So we have found that the average waiting time for under preemptive SJF is 7.75, and you should also compare the result based on preemptive scheduling, non-preemptive scheduling, and find out which one is has given better performance. Now coming to the drawbacks of SJF, preemptive SJF, it's going to inherit the drawback of non-preemptive. That is blocking or indefinite starvation is very high. But additionally, the preemptive version of SJF is going to add one more drawback, which is number of context switches will be too much. In fact, SJF itself is going to have more number of context switches than the first come first served. So when it comes to preemptive scheduling, because it's going to be preemptive, it may replace the current process more frequently whenever a newly joining process having lower service time has been found. So the context switches, number of context switches will be very high in the case of preemptive SJF comparing to non-preemptive. So the starvation, that is waiting indefinitely, is possible, and especially long process. So under SJF, the long process are the ones which will be starving. And particularly in systems which have heavy load and continuous supply of processes, there the long process will permanently stay in the queue without getting a chance.